You what? I couldn't believe what our HOA president was saying. I had your daughter's car towed from your driveway. Karen smirked, tapping her clipboard. Unauthorized vehicle. What this power-hungry HOA tyrant didn't realize. She just towed the mayor's daughter's car. You see, my stepdaughter Jessica is the mayor's daughter, and Emma is her sister. The bright orange sticker was still on my phone screen. Unauthorized vehicle, immediate removal. Emma's panicked voice came through. Dad, my car's gone. I have a final exam in an hour. Where's my daughter's car? I demanded. Karen's smug smile said it all. That unauthorized vehicle was violating HOA regulations. I had it removed. It's been in our driveway for 2 years. Section 8, paragraph 3, she recited, tapping manicured nails on her clipboard. All vehicles require proper registration stickers. Yours only shows one approved vehicle. What Karen didn't know, Emma wasn't just my daughter. Her stepsister Jessica was the mayor's daughter and married to the city councilman who oversaw towing licenses. Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her HOA career. And I had it all on security camera. I drove straight to Johnson's Towing, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The image of Karen supervising as Emma's car was towed away kept replaying in my mind. Her little power trip just because I'd questioned her. Ridiculous $15,000 community improvement assessment at last month's meeting. I'm here for the Honda Civic from Maple Creek Estates, I told the board attendant. $275 towing fee plus $95 HOA violation. He mumbled without looking up. Fees double. After 24 hours. I'd like to speak to your manager, I said, keeping my voice steady. Mike, the manager, appeared moments later. What's the problem? You towed a car from my private property without my consent, I said, showing him my driver's license and property deed. I want to see what paperwork authorized this. Mike hesitated, then brought out a file. Spread across the counter were several documents, including one with my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. This is forged, I said, pointing to the obvious fake. You towed based on falsified documents. Mike looked uncomfortable. We just respond to authorized requests. The door opened behind me. My stepdaughter Jessica entered in her professional pantsuit. The manager's eyes widened in recognition. Ms. Reynolds, he stammered. I see you've met my stepfather, Jessica said warmly, placing a hand on my shoulder. I've reviewed the city's towing ordinance, specifically Section 5.7 regarding removal from private property without explicit owner consent. Just then, Karen burst through the door, face flushed. James, I've been informed you're causing problems. The HOA has complete authority. Technically, Jessica interrupted, you don't have authority to remove vehicles from private property without the owner's consent, regardless of any HOA agreement. Karen turned her glare to Jessica. And who exactly are you? Jessica Reynolds. James's stepdaughter, the mayor's daughter, and married to Councilman David Reynolds, who oversees the Committee on Towing Ordinances. I'm particularly interested in how you obtained my stepfather's signature. Karen paled but quickly recovered. That's standard HOA procedure. Actually, Jessica replied calmly, forgery is a crime in this state. Using falsified documents to authorize towing violates several regulations. Karen's confidence finally cracked. The board, we have procedures. Mike pushed a form across the counter. I'll release the vehicle immediately. No charge. Karen pointed her finger at me. This isn't over, James. The board will hear about your insubordination. Jessica stepped between us. Mrs. Williams, I think the City Council will be very interested in reviewing your HOA's practices and potential abuses of authority. As we drove Emma's car home, I couldn't help feeling this was just the beginning. I sent our security footage to Jessica, the timestamp clearly showing Karen directing the tow truck on our property, occasionally stepping into frame to supervise, with a smile on her face. The next morning, Karen appeared at my door with a stack of papers. "A formal complaint about your disruptive behavior," she announced, shoving them at me. "Special board meeting tonight to discuss your violations." "I'll be there," I said simply, my calm demeanor clearly unnerving her. As she marched away, I noticed neighbors watching from windows. Mrs. Chen gave me a thumbs up. Mr. Patel nodded in solidarity. For years they'd endured Karen's petty tyranny, too afraid to challenge her. I spent the day preparing, gathering security footage, messages from harassed neighbors, and most importantly, Section 12 of our HOA covenant. The ethics clause prohibiting board members from engaging in harassment or using their position for personal vendettas. Something was changing in our neighborhood. People were tired of living in fear of violation notices and arbitrary rules. Karen had made her biggest mistake. She didn't just target me, she awakened an entire community. By the time the meeting started that evening, the community center was packed. Neighbors who normally avoided HOA meetings showed up, whispering about the showdown they'd heard was coming. Karen sat at the front table with the other board members, her expression a mask of calm authority as she called the meeting to order. "We're here to discuss serious violations by the James Miller family," she began, her voice echoing through the room. "Multiple instances of non-compliance with community standards and aggressive behavior toward HOA leadership." I sat quietly as she listed my supposed infractions: unauthorized vehicles, improper yard maintenance, decorative items exceeding size limitations, each accusation more ridiculous than the last. "Bird feeders 2 inches too tall," she said with deadly seriousness. "Halloween decorations visible after November 5th. Grass exceeding regulation height by 0.75 inches. Some board members were nodding along. The room felt tense. Karen had been in power for 7 years. Her network of allies ran deep. Furthermore, Karen continued, projecting photos of my perfectly normal yard onto the screen. "Mr. Miller has engaged in confrontational behavior with HOA leadership, making threats and causing disruption to our harmonious community." Several of her friends in the audience murmured their agreement. I noticed Ms. Patterson, Karen's bridge partner, shooting me a disapproving glare. "The recommended action," Karen announced, looking directly at me with satisfaction, "is a $2,500 fine for multiple violations, plus mandatory compliance reviews weekly for 6 months. Board member Richard Thompson looked troubled, but remained silent. The other members avoided eye contact with the audience. "Do you have anything to say in your defense, Mr. Miller?" Karen finally asked, confidence radiating from her as she gestured, magnanimously allowing me to speak. This was the moment of truth. I could feel the weight of the neighborhood watching. Some looked hopeful, others skeptical. Most just looked tired of Karen's reign, but too afraid to challenge her directly. I stood up slowly, laptop in hand. "I do, actually," I said, moving toward the projector. "But first, I'd like to address something more important than bird feeders and car stickers. I'd like to discuss Section 12 of our covenant," I said, connecting my laptop to the projector, "the ethics clause that each board member signed." A murmur went through the crowd as I displayed the text on screen. "Board members shall not use their position to target specific residents or engage in personal vendettas." I clicked to the next slide. Our home security footage showing Karen directing the towing of Emma's car, her satisfaction evident in her body language as she supervised the removal from our driveway. "This is from yesterday morning," I explained. "My daughter's car being towed from our private property without my consent." The room fell silent. Karen's smile faltered slightly. "What many of you don't know," I continued, "is that Karen forged my signature on the towing authorization." I clicked to show the document side by side with my actual signature. The differences were obvious even to untrained eyes. Board member Janet Thompson leaned forward. "These are serious allegations, James. Do you have proof of the forgery?" The HOA towing company has already confirmed the document is falsified, I replied. But this isn't just about one incident. I clicked through to the next slides. Mrs. Rodriguez was fined for her medical equipment delivery after questioning the pool budget. The elderly woman nodded from her seat. Mr. Chen's children's playground equipment was deemed against regulations after he asked about landscaping costs. Mr. Chen raised his hand in confirmation. "In fact," I said, looking around the room, "how many of you have experienced similar treatment after questioning Karen's decisions at HOA meetings?" Hands began to rise throughout the room, slowly at first, then more confidently, until nearly half the attendees had their hands up. Karen jumped to her feet, her voice shaking. "This is absurd. James is clearly orchestrating a campaign against me because he doesn't want to follow our community standards." The room remained silent, her words falling flat against the mountain of evidence. As she continued, her defense became increasingly desperate, accusing me of manipulating footage and taking statements out of context. "And where did you get these so-called testimonials?" she demanded. "These people have all had legitimate violations. They're just angry about being caught." Just then, Jessica entered the room carrying several official-looking folders. Karen's eyes widened as my stepdaughter approached the front. "The City Council has received multiple complaints about this HOA's practices," Jessica announced, "particularly regarding towing authorization and selective enforcement of rules. We've opened a formal investigation." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of white. "Additionally," Jessica continued, "we're investigating possible misuse of HOA funds for the past 3 years. Karen's voice rose to a near shriek. "This is a witch hunt. I've done nothing but try to maintain our property values and community standards." I clicked to the next slide. "Then perhaps you can explain why 16 identical violations at your own home have been ignored for the past 3 years. The screen showed photos of Karen's house, with the same infractions she'd penalized others for. Janet Thompson, the senior board member, stood up. "I think we've heard enough. I call for an immediate executive session of the board." As board members filed into the side room, the crowd buzzed with conversation. Karen stood alone, her clipboard clutched to her chest, watching her kingdom crumble around her. Neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact now approached me with their own stories. The teacher fined for displaying students' artwork. The elderly couple threatened with legal action over their mobility ramp. The single dad cited for having his children's bikes visible from the street. After 30 tense minutes, the board members emerged. Janet approached the microphone. "Effective immediately," she announced. "Karen Williams has been removed from her position as HOA president pending a full investigation of these allegations." The crowd broke into spontaneous applause as Karen stormed out of the building, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "Furthermore," Janet continued once the noise subsided, "the board will be implementing new transparency measures and reviewing all outstanding violations and fines issued over the past year." Jessica stepped forward. "The City Council will be working closely with your new board leadership to ensure compliance with municipal regulations. We're also proposing new ordinances requiring HOAs to implement fair enforcement practices and transparent financial reporting." She smiled slightly. "We're calling it the Community Fairness Act, though some at City Hall have suggested the Karen Williams Act might be more fitting." Laughter rippled through the room, releasing years of tension. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors lingered, talking excitedly about changes they hoped to see. Some approached board members with ideas and offers to volunteer. For the first time in years, people weren't rushing to escape an HOA meeting. They were engaged, invested, and hopeful about their community's future. And it all started because one power-hungry president made the mistake of towing the wrong family's car. In the weeks that followed, our neighborhood transformed. The board cancelled over $50,000 in questionable fines. Children's laughter returned to front yards as families reclaimed their spaces without fear of violations. My daughter's car sat proudly in our driveway without any special stickers. The official investigation revealed more than we'd expected. Karen had been directing HOA contracts to companies owned by family members and channeling community funds into projects that somehow always benefited her inner circle. The final Saturday of the month, we held our first community cookout in years. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves emerged, bringing dishes and stories. As I grilled burgers, Mrs. Chen approached, her grandchildren playing freely in the communal green space. For the first time, she said, we feel like we actually live here, not just exist under someone's thumb. Tom Martinez, the new interim HOA president, stopped by with a plate of his famous empanadas. We're rewriting the covenant, he told me, focusing on what really matters without micromanaging people's lives. A moving truck caught everyone's attention, backing into Karen's driveway. The for sale sign in her yard now sported a bold, sold sticker. Word was she'd purchased a condo in a building with no HOA. Sometimes, standing up against unfairness isn't just about winning your own battle. It's about creating space for everyone to live with dignity. And it all started because one power-hungry president towed the wrong family's car.